I hope that every time you come into this parish church of St. Gregory the Great, you will have that same confident trust that if you give God permission for every event that takes place in your life, you will be surrounded by God's angels and have the help of God's mother and have peace in heart as you carry on your daily life. Now, have a look, will you please, at the stained glass window. I have several things to say tonight, but first let's have a tour of the window. Now, I'm not so used to using a laser, and I won't flash it in anyone's faces. I'll flash it to your left. Do you see this little red dot? Okay, now we're moving to the right, and it's on the wood, okay? Now I'm keeping it on the wood, okay, and it's right under Francis of Assisi. There is himself, right in the middle. Haven't I surrounding him now with the red light? Okay. Francis was born in 1182, towards the end of the 12th century, and he lived until 1226 in the 13th century. Somewhere around the year 1206, he had a true conversion of heart, and by 1209, he was already gathering followers to himself. And central to his life of conversion to God, he was not the greatest sinner, but he was a gurrier, if you want to say. He was a hooligan in the streets of Assisi, which was the town where he grew up. He belonged to a gang there, the Sons and Daughters of Babylon, and they were ruffians and rabble-rousers, and they got into trouble and mischief-making and tomfoolery. And so he had to go through a conversion. He went off to be a soldier, and to make the long story short, while in prison, caught as a prisoner of war, he started to rethink the meaning of his life, and slowly but surely the call to give God permission took hold of his heart. Now, he began to repair a ramshackle, follow the red line again, the red dot, around the bottom, up the perimeter on the right, and see that little building in the middle there. It was quite ramshackle. It was a dilapidated little church building in Assisi that dated back to the 10th century, about 250 years before Francis's time, but it was falling into ruin. And it was the church of Our Lady of the Angels, little chapel. And it had the nickname, the Porziuncola. Now that's a fancy Italian word. How many of you are Italian? Then you know how to spell Porziuncola. It means little portion, because it was a wee little chapel. And he repaired it. It was one of 3 chapels in Assisi that he repaired. And after he repaired it, Mass, Holy Mass, started to be offered in it. And he started regularly attending Mass in that chapel whenever there would be a priest there. By now, he was wearing a habit similar to what Father Francis, Father Michael, and I wear, because he was leading a life of poverty and charity to the poor in Assisi. He even worked with the lepers. And one day, didn't he hear the gospel being proclaimed in that little chapel of Our Lady of the Angels about the call to lead lives of following the apostles, of giving up everything, giving God permission? And he came out of that chapel after Mass inflamed with a new desire to give God permission. He got that lesson, learned well, in the chapel of Our Lady of the Angels at the Portiuncula. And so as soon as he came out of the chapel, he shouted. Well, he was Italian, and he was emotional, and he liked to express his emotions. So he shouted, "This is what I seek. This is what I want. This is what I long to do with all my heart." And he ripped off his leather belt, and he tied a rope cord around his waist. And ever since then, his followers wear the rope around our waist as a symbol that, like Francis, we want to give God permission. And this is what we want, this is what we seek, this is what we long to do with all our heart. And slowly but surely, more men followed him. Now, to the right of Francis, again, follow the red dot. There we go. See those three blokes? One of them is Franciscan in the middle. We believe that's one of the earlier followers of Francis, perhaps Saint Anthony. Saint Anthony came to join the Franciscan order in the lifetime of Francis, and he was known as the evangelical doctor because he was always reading the scriptures and he was always preaching about the scriptures. Now behind him, the chap with the hood over his head and the cross most likely was a later follower of Francis, a layman by the name of Dante Alighieri, the great medieval Italian poet Dante, who wrote the Divine Comedy and became a third order Franciscan. It was at the chapel of Our Lady of the Angels that St. Francis, under the patronage of Our Lady, founded three orders, or three branches of the Franciscan order. He founded the first order of men, the second order of women, known as the Poor Clares because their first member was Saint Clare of Assisi, and this is the 800th anniversary year of Saint Clare becoming a Franciscan. And he founded a third order for laymen and women to live the Franciscan spirit according to their lay state of life. And the foremost of them, among the foremost, was the poet Dante, also Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, Saint Louis the King of France, many other popes and potentates down through the ages belong to the third order. All three orders were founded at that little chapel of the Portiuncula in Assisi. Now let me continue explaining the window, and I'll come back and tell you what that chapel looks like today. It still stands. On the left, the red dot, here we go, but we're not going all the way across. We're going back to the middle window and up the side. There's the angel, and then we've got to the left more angels, and then above more angels. The two angels above Francis are carrying monograms, the A meaning the alpha, the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and the second angel carrying the omega, the last letter of the Greek alphabet, meaning from the beginning to the end. Jesus uses them in the scriptures. I am the Alpha and the Omega. When you give God permission, it means you're giving Jesus Christ the role that he asked you to give him of being the Alpha and the Omega of each of your lives, the beginning and the end. That's what Francis of Assisi did, and with the help of the angels, he taught his followers to do, to let Jesus Christ be the Alpha and the Omega of their lives. That's why Jesus Christ the king is at the very top. He's the Lord of the life of Francis, the life of Francis's followers, of the first three orders, and the life of all of you who take the lessons of this window to heart. When you say that you are giving permission to Jesus Christ to be the Lord of your lives, then you don't belong to yourself. You belong to Him. Even sin, all sin, is the assertion that I belong to myself. I don't belong to myself. I belong to Jesus Christ. And that's why you want to give God permission, so that He can daily transform you into the ideal person that God created you to be. No two of you are the same. No two of us are the same. God created each of us in His image and likeness, but unique. And each of us has a unique destiny in this reality called the church that Jesus Christ established. We each have a unique role in this world and in the next. And when we give God permission, the way Francis of Assisi did at the Portiuncula, then we are well on the way to fulfilling that role. Now, how do we give God permission? That's the key. It's not easy, obviously, if you're suffering terrible illness, if you've got terrible woes in your family, if you've got fractured homes, horrible problems with debts or employment or addictions, worries about children and grandchildren, conflicts with neighbors. It's hard to give God permission day in and day out when there are all these other preoccupations. And that's why Francis turned everything over to Our Lady of the Angels. Angels, the very word angelos, angel, means one who has been sent. An emissary, an angel is an emissary sent by God. We as Catholics understand that the angels are real persons. They just don't have bodies like us, although artistically we depict them with bodies. In fact, they're spiritual beings without human bodies. There are different species of God's creation, but they're persons, real persons, and they relate to us, and God sends them to be involved in our lives, and He's made Our Lady the Queen of the Angels so that she can, at God's command, coordinate their movements. And that's what St. Francis came to learn at the chapel of the Portiuncula, to rely